Sanctus Bruno, qui cognominatur Bonifacius archiepiscopus et monachus, decim suae conversionis anno in confinio Rusciae et Lithuae a paganis capite plexus, cum suis 87 idus martiae petit coelos.
In the annals of Quedlinburg, an abbey in Germany, it is written that in the year 1009, Saint Bruno, also called Boniface, an archbishop and monk, was killed by the pagans at the border of the Rus and of Lithuania, along with 18 of his companions, who entered into heaven on the 9th of March. Bruno had been working as a missionary in the area for about a year, baptizing a tribal leader named Netimer, chieftain of the Yotvingians, an early Baltic tribe whose territory was roughly in what is now southwest Lithuania. He was beheaded by Netimer's brother Zebedin, who hanged Bruno's fellow missionaries. In this brief note of mission and martyrdom written in Latin is the earliest known mention of the name Lithuania. It would be almost 400 more years before the Christianization of Lithuania, the last pagan nation in Europe. But in 1009, Lithuania was not even a nation. Instead, it was a collection of Baltic tribes spread along the eastern shores of the Baltic Sea. From Old Prussia, now Kaliningrad Oblast and northern Poland, up through the lands next to the Gulf of Riga in modern Latvia. But where are these places? Where is the Baltic Sea? And what is the story of these people? The Baltic Sea. It is a cold, northeastern arm of the Atlantic Ocean. Resting between Scandinavia at the west and the Baltic nations to the east. Within its depths lie the remains of an ancient, primeval evergreen forest, from which fossilized tree sap has washed up to the eastern shore for untold millennia. Beginning at least 3,500 years ago, a sea-born golden reddish jewel was carried along the Amber Road south to the Mediterranean, adorning the courts of the senators of Rome, to the kings of Syria, to the pharaohs of Egypt, and throughout the world. 163 miles of the eastern shore of the Baltic belongs to the modern country of Lithuania, from which amber still makes the journey out into the world. 1/5 of that coastline is protected by the Kuršių Nerija, the Curonian Spit, a long sandbar that is said to have been thrown there by a young giantess named Neringa to ward off evil storms sent by an angry suitor. Poised between east and west, between Orthodox and Catholics, this last of Europe's pagan nations did not forget its ancient tales of the giantess Neringa, Agla, queen of serpents, or the iron wolf, but rather remembered them and added to them the legends of the Hill of Crosses and the miracle-working icon of Our Lady of the Gate of the Dawn. In this green northern land, history and legend have met and fused. With the martyrdom of Saints Antanas, Eustachius, and Jonas in 1347, the Baltic Sun Cross, once carried by pagans, became the cross of Jesus Christ.
Lithuania was once the largest country in Europe. Its earliest Christian contacts were with the Orthodox Church, and the first church built in Lithuania was an Orthodox church.
Through centuries of history, from its first and only king Mindaugas, to the time of the Grand Dukes, to the union with Poland in the Commonwealth of Two Nations, to the partitioning between the empires of Eastern Europe, to early independence in the 20th century, to invasions and occupations of both Nazis and Soviets, to becoming the first nation to break away from the Soviet Union, this proud people has kept their faith in Christ. Among them, centuries of Orthodox Christians and dozens of saints.
But there's still much work to be done here in this little land where Orthodox Christians are a minority.
Welcome to The Wolf and the Cross, an Orthodox Christian pilgrimage in Lithuania, a documentary from Ancient Faith Radio created and written by Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Richard Rohlin.
Particular grave of our family, even though it didn't have their names on it because it was old and they didn't have very much money, they could only afford one grave, was, it felt after we prayed the service like something had been mended that I didn't know was broken, and it was a really good experience and emotional, and I think I would go and visit that place again if we went back to Lithuania.
I'm Father Andrew Stephen Damick. On August 15th to 25th, 2022, my friend Richard and I took a pilgrimage to Lithuania, along with my teenage daughter, Evangelize. For me, this was the trip of a lifetime, though I hope it is not the last time I go. My great-grandparents, Antanas and Olga Damick, immigrated separately from Lithuania to America around the turn of the 20th century. And except for one visit home for Olga in 1936, no one in my family had been back to our ancestral homeland until now. With the firm commitment of my great-grandparents to be Americans, they did not pass on the Lithuanian language, culture, or even the food to the next generation, which included my grandfather. The family connection to Lithuania was erased in a single generation. And with that new American generation losing touch with each other over their lifetimes, even the memory of our Lithuanian history was lost. So by the time I was born, 3 generations after the immigration, Lithuania was just a name, a word for some distant point in the past. Over the years of my life, and especially after I became an Orthodox Christian in early adulthood, I began to be interested in the history, and especially the Orthodox history of Lithuania. So I made contact with Orthodox Christians in Lithuania and began to learn from them. I also began to research, as best as I could, the people from my family, the Damick family, which here in America, for my little branch, became Damick. I went to Lithuania not only to venerate its holy places and to meet its Orthodox Christians, but also to see if I could somehow heal something that had been broken, an old wound. For me, this pilgrimage wasn't about trying to become something that I'm not, to claim something that I was not given. It was about connection, both old and new. As with all pilgrimage, for me it was about integration. To receive something that God would give me, to make it now my own, and to bring it back and tell the story to those who will listen.
I'm Richard Rohlin. In August of 2022, I had the opportunity to travel with Father Andrew to his ancestral homeland of Lithuania. Now, as far as I know, none of my ancestors are from Lithuania, though some of them, Scandinavian explorers, merchants, and pirates, almost certainly sailed the Baltic Sea. For as long as I can remember, my imaginative landscape has been dominated by the misty shores of that sea, their vast pine forests, rivers, and valleys, there at the crossroads of East and West. These images were gleaned from the literature of the Middle Ages, sagas, chronicles, romances, and heroic poetry. But until a few years ago, my impression of that part of the world was relegated to the distant past. Then, two things happened to change that. The first was that, for a period of time, my wife and I fostered a young girl from the Baltic states, specifically Latvia. She arrived knowing very little English, and so I made an effort to learn some words of her language, Latvian, so that we would be able to communicate in some basic ways. We took her into our home and into our hearts, and for her part, she taught us about her culture and even introduced us to some Latvian cuisine. The second thing that happened right around that same time is that I, along with my wife and children, became an Orthodox Christian. With these relationships, my connection to the shores of the Baltic was more than academic. It was wrapped up in friends, adopted family, and saints my family learned to love and venerate. My own patron saint, Saint Seraphim of Sarov, kept a particular icon of the Mother of God in his cell. Unusually for an Eastern icon, it depicted the Theotokos without the Christ child. She is shown from the waist up, her hands folded on her chest, her head bowed in the act of prayer and assent, for, it is said, this icon depicts her at the moment of the Annunciation, when she gives her assent, her fiat, to the Archangel, and becomes the mother of Emmanuel, God with us. Saint Seraphim was found on his knees before this icon when he reposed. I was captivated by this icon from the moment that I first saw and read about it, and commissioned a reproduction of it before I was even a catechumen. As it turns out, this icon is almost visually identical to, and there are reasons to believe it may be a distant copy of, an important Lithuanian icon known as Our Lady of the Gate of Dawn. I have a personal theory that goes something like this. Since it is through Mary, the Mother of God, that Christ became incarnate within time and history, a culture, a civilization, a nation is not really Christianized, has not really manifested the reality of the incarnation until it has its own particular icon of the Mother of God. For Lithuanians, and particularly for the people of Vilnius, Our Lady of the Gate of Dawn is that icon. We'll say more about this beautiful, wonder-working icon later in this documentary, but suffice it to say for now that this icon has been very important to me, my relationship with the Theotokos, and my journey to the Orthodox Church. So when Father Andrew asked what I'd be interested in seeing in Lithuania, there was really just one answer. I wanted to go and see Our Lady. Along the way, I encountered several other wonder-working icons of the Theotokos. I kissed the bones of the martyrs, and I encountered Christ in the faces of my brothers and sisters in the faith. And I gained a fresh perspective on what it means to be an Orthodox Christian in this age and this world in which we find ourselves.
This documentary, The Wolf and the Cross, is dedicated to telling the story we learned. Our story begins with the last pagans of Europe. Although St. Bruno had baptized a number of Lithuanians in the early 11th century, the various tribes that made up the Baltic lands did not become Christian for almost 400 more years, long after Roman Catholicism was established to the west and Orthodox Christianity to the east. In this episode, we will explore those centuries, as well as some of the pre-medieval history of Lithuania. But first, there are a couple of people I want you to meet.
My name is Gintaras Sungaila. I am a priest of the Orthodox Church, and also I'm a PhD student in a philosophy department. In my life, I have studied Orthodox theology, philosophy in a secular university, also religious studies in a secular university. And although my main focus of research is the Greek patristic tradition, especially I love Greek philosophy and also Greek liturgics. But I was also always interested in many different things, many different religions. So I have a passion for history of religion. I am married, I have a wife and a 3-year-old son.
Hello everyone, my name is Justina Trinkūnaitė Sungailinė, and I am a wife of Orthodox priest Gintaras Sungaila, and also a very happy mother of the wonderful boy who is now 3 years old. I studied music composition, and I write music in my free time. Mostly I like to write for voices, for choirs. I am a conductor of an Orthodox Church choir called Amnos. And I also work at music school as a teacher. I have 2 subjects, solfeggio and composition of music. My hobby is photography. I really like to write poetry and also to listen to the sounds of nature. That's all about me. Nice to meet you.
Father Gintaras and his wife, Motinella Justina, generously gave us 10 days of their time, traveling with us throughout Lithuania and teaching us many things along the way. We had other companions whom you'll meet too, whose voices you'll also hear, but Father Gintaras is the one who guided us and taught us the most, so you'll be hearing a lot from him. You may have noticed that Father Gintaras and Motinella Justina seem to have 2 different surnames. His is Sungaila, and hers is Trinkūnaitė Sungailinė. So here's one of your first lessons in Lithuanian culture. Lithuanian men have a last name that gets altered for their daughters and their wives. So his name is Sungaila, while hers is Sungailinė. That ending means it's her married name. If they had a daughter, the name would be Sungailite. Justina's maiden name is in there too, Trinkūnaitė, which is a form of Trinkūnas. She uses this because of her professional work as a composer and musician. If my family used traditional Lithuanian surnames, mine would be Damick. My wife's would be Damickienė, and my daughter's would be Damickite. So in one small family, you can have 3 different versions of one family name. I met Father Gintaras through the internet a couple of years before we made our pilgrimage, so we were already friends, but by the time the pilgrimage was done, I can say that we had truly become fast friends, brothers in Christ. Father Gintaras was also the best possible guide for us because the story we want to tell you is framed by Lithuanian history, and he's a great historian. I'm a lover of history myself, and Lithuanians have a sense of their history, which understandably goes pretty deep.
I think for Europeans in general, history is much more important than for Americans because of the ethnic nationality and ethnic national states which are prevalent here. And in Lithuania, if you compare a Lithuanian constitution with an American constitution, you can see how the history of our state and of our nation is connected to our identity. It's a core of our identity because American constitution starts with we the people and the general idea that people have rights and they establish their state, etc. But Lithuanian constitution starts with Lithuanian nation having created their state centuries ago, and which defended its freedom and its sovereign state for centuries, and now restores its statehood. And the whole idea that Lithuania exists for centuries and struggled through those centuries, that's like the basic reason why Lithuanian state exists according to our constitution. So it's very important to our identity. Of course, there are people who have different political views in Lithuania. So those who are more liberal would place less importance on history. Those who are more conservative would emphasize history more. But in general, it's part of Lithuanian identity to know the history of our nation, to feel the solidarity with ethnic Lithuanians, and also when you, Father, were here in Lithuania, you could see that in Lithuania the society is much more homogeneous than American society. Most of people in Lithuania are Lithuanians. About 80% of the population is Lithuanian. Most of the Lithuanians are Roman Catholic, and everywhere you go, the society is more homogeneous. Starting with the school, when students attend the school, the sense of history is something which is developed in a person, because you always hear about the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, about the struggles for the freedom of our nation, and during 12 years of basic education, it will be something which is always present. In day-to-day life, it is something which is present, especially if you live in a larger city. All of our cities, we have something which is called the Old Town, the old part of a city which is hundreds of years old, and it's something which surrounds you. And usually when people go on with their day-to-day life, they don't think about it, but as it is with a lot of things, when some kind of problem arises, those things become relevant again. So in our political life, in our cultural life, from time to time you can hear different debates about concerning history and concerning our heritage, but in day-to-day life it's something which is simply present, and it is a part of identity.
It's impossible to transmit that same feeling for history without actually being part of a culture, but I hope that by the end of this documentary, you will begin to have a sense for how Lithuanians feel about the long story of their land, from ancient Baltic paganism to the modern period. In a moment, we will talk about that Baltic paganism, the religion practiced in what is now Lithuania, as well as in the lands to its immediate west and north. But who are these ancient and last pagans? Where do they live? First, this word Baltic. That's not a word these people apply to themselves or to their religion. When referring to these ancient people, Baltic is a modern academic word, though it was used to refer to the sea near which these people lived as far back as the 3rd century BC. But now the word is used in the languages of the 3 Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, to refer to their region, and it's used in English that way too. Modern Lithuania is a small country about the size of the American state of West Virginia, home to 2.8 million people. It's at the same latitude as Newfoundland and Canada. If you look at a map of Europe, it is in the northeast, due east of Denmark and northern England, lying on the eastern coast of the Baltic Sea. To its north is Latvia. To its southeast is Belarus. Southwest is Poland, and it shares a western border with the small Russian exclave of Kaliningrad Oblast. At various points prior to the 19th century, some or all of these countries were part of the Lithuanian state. As Lithuania emerged as a state onto the global map in the early 13th century, two distinct Lithuanian tribes inhabited most of the region. In the east, the Aukštaitijans, the Highlanders, and in the west, Samogitians, the Lowlanders. But there were other Baltic tribes, the Curonians out on the coast, the Scalavians, Prussians, and Yotvingians to the southwest, and the Semigalians, Silonians, and Latgalians to the north in what is now Latvia. Most of these groups had various sub-tribes as well. These people were the descendants of Baltic tribes that had lived in this region since about 2000 BC. In modern times, some of these tribes became ethnic groups within Lithuania, and the country's population remains one of the most genetically distinct in the world. Until the medieval period, most Baltic tribes had little contact with the outside world, and very little is known about their prehistoric life, beyond a handful of archaeological finds and linguistic traces left in the names of rivers. Many linguists believe that the languages spoken by these Baltic peoples had their ancient origin in a Proto-Balto-Slavic tongue, with the Baltic languages emerging in the west and the Slavic languages in the east. Some, however, argue that the Baltic languages were never joined with the Slavic, but only have similarities because of loanwords crossing between languages. That said, while there are many Slavic languages still being spoken, such as Polish, Russian, Ukrainian, Serbian, and Bulgarian, only two Baltic languages remain, Latvian and Lithuanian. There were historically several others, including Old Prussian, a West Baltic language. But the last Old Prussian speaker died in the early 18th century. Lithuanian is the oldest Indo-European language still being spoken. What do I mean by that? The Lithuanian language preserves many archaic features that stretch far back into the Indo-European language past. This largest of the language families of the earth includes such diverse tongues as French, Hindi, Armenian, Persian, Greek, Danish, German, Russian, Welsh, and English. All of these languages and many more have their origins in one ancient Proto-Indo-European language, changing in numerous ways over thousands of years and resulting in hundreds of distinct languages. The one living language that has held on to these ancient roots most tenaciously is Lithuanian, which is why it has many words that are very close to Sanskrit, the language of ancient India.
Lithuanian religion and Lithuanian language is connected to India through Indo-European heritage. So that's why you have many similar words in Sanskrit and Lithuanian. Some of the examples is the word Dievas, which means God, which is the name of the highest god in Lithuanian paganism. And in Sanskrit, Deva is actually a term referring to a deity. In Lithuanian, when we say Lord, we say Viešpats, which is an old word referring to any master. Like in English, you can say Lord about God, and you can say landlord, for example. In Lithuanian, usually today we say Viešpats only for God, but in older Lithuanian, you could say Viešpats, for example, for a landlord. And in Sanskrit, Viešpati means a chief of a settlement or a tribe. So basically, Viešpati means the same as English Lord. And as Lithuanian Viešpats. There is also an interesting inversion in regard to Devas in Iranian culture, because the same word, like Lithuanian Dievas, Sanskrit Deva, in Iranian religion, in Zoroastrianism, The devas are actually evil spirits, evil deities. The main words we use are actually connected to this old Indo-European part of our heritage.
If you've ever learned Latin or Greek or other inflected languages, you know how difficult it can be to learn all the case endings, to figure out how a word fits into a sentence. Lithuanian has 2 grammatical genders for nouns and 3 for adjectives, pronouns, numerals, and participles. There are 12 noun declensions declined in 7 cases, 5 adjective declensions, and 1 participle declension. In the indicative and indirect moods, verbs can have 11 different tenses. Accent on words is irregular and has to be learned by rote. Lithuanian uses a modified form of the Latin alphabet with 32 letters. I could go on, but all this complexity is part of why there are not very many people who learn Lithuanian as a second language. Here's a very short sample of Father Ginteris speaking Lithuanian. He's about to start a catechism lesson.
Katekizmo komentarą. Anąsyk aptarėme 6 klausimą, šiandien judame toliau. 7 klausimas skamba, kuo skiriasi tikėjimas ir žinojimas. Atsakymas. Tikėjimas ir žinojimas skiriasi tuo, kad žinojimo objektas tai, kas pasiekiama juslėmis ir pažinu, o tikėjimo objektas tai, kas nematoma ir netgi neįkandama mūsų mąstymui.
Throughout this documentary series, you'll be hearing a lot of Lithuanian, especially in music. But not everyone in Lithuania speaks what is called Standard Lithuanian. The Samogitians in the western part of the country speak their own dialect that is mostly mutually intelligible with the Standard dialect, but also has a lot in common with Latvian to the north. Here's a short clip from a young woman telling a story in that Samogitian dialect.
Šios apskrities žmonės fobulint, kad senovės šis kalnis buvo dikčiom didelė gerbėms, į kožnum žmogum, katrie praeidavo pro ton kalną, ane nusimdavo kepurį ir pasakydavo, labas vakars, pon salkas kalne, katrie žmonės to nepadarydavo, taniems kaip kažkokiu nematom ranką nuo galvos ten kepurį numuždavo.
You might be able to tell that there's a different accent there. And if you're wondering what that story is about, well, you'll get to hear more in a future episode. I hope you'll learn a little Lithuanian as we go, though. So here's your first lesson, courtesy of Motinella Justina.
Hello, everyone. Today I would like to teach you how to say hello in Lithuanian. A formal way to greet a group of multiple people in Lithuanian is sveiki. Repeat after me. Sveiki. We also use sveiki to greet a single person in a polite and formal way, which is called polite plural. If you want to say hi to your friend, regardless of his gender, you can say labas. Otherwise, you can say sveika to a female friend or sveikas for a male friend. Good morning is labas rytas. Good afternoon is laba diena. Good evening is labas vakaras. Now you know how to greet someone in Lithuanian.
There, now you know enough to be polite. Not much is actually known about the paganism of the pre-Christian Lithuanians, mainly because they were an illiterate society. Writing came to Lithuania along with Christianity. Among Lithuanians themselves, what remains of their ancestors' pagan religion is remembered mainly in folk tales, which are not reliable sources when it comes to answering the question of what the beliefs and practices of an extinct religion really included. And even these legends and songs did not begin to get written down until the early 18th century, more than 300 years after the Christianization of Lithuania. There are no sources from ancient Lithuanian pagans themselves testifying to their religion. Everything we have about it comes either from outsiders or from stories written down in the Christian period. In some ways, this story is parallel to the Norse pagan religion practiced by the Northmen on the other side of the Baltic Sea. While many students of Norse mythology may be familiar with the Eddas and similar texts, these date from centuries after the last Norse pagan was baptized into the church and were themselves written down by Christians. We simply do not know how much of these texts truly represents authentic paganism, because there is no first-hand testimony available. That said, we do have some pre-Christian outsider witnesses to the spiritual character of these tribes. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus, for instance, writes of a group he calls the Nevri, who live in the region and have been identified by historians with the Yotvingians. He writes this:
The Nuri followed Scythian customs, but one generation before the advent of Darius's army, they happened to be driven from their country by snakes, for their land produced great numbers of these, and still more came down on them out of the desolation on the north, until at last the Nuri were so afflicted that they left their own country and lived among the Budini. It may be that these people are wizards, for the Scythians and the Greeks settled in Scythia say that once a year every one of the Nuri becomes a wolf for a few days and changes back again to his former shape. Those who tell this tale do not convince me, but they tell it nonetheless and swear to its truth.
Imagine my surprise when I realized that the Yotvingians inhabited the region where my ancestors lived. You don't want to think you're descended from wizards and werewolves. But, well, there it is. The same story was even repeated by the Roman geographer Pomponius Mela 5 centuries later, writing during the New Testament period. The earliest known mythological tale from Baltic paganism is the Tale of Sovius, which was written down in a Russian translation in the mid-13th century. It's really weird, and it goes like this.
Silvius went hunting one day and caught a wild boar. He began butchering it and removed its 9 spleens, giving them to his children for them to cook. Instead of cooking them, however, they ate them raw. Becoming enraged, Silvius decided to descend into the underworld, traveling through 8 of the gates of hell. He could not make it through the 9th gate, however, and so one of his sons decided to help him. The other brothers became angry with the helpful son, who then offered to help his father Silvius receive a proper burial. So he went down to the underworld and had dinner with his father. That night the son made his father a bed underground, but Silvius slept very badly, saying that he was eaten all night by worms. On the second night the son made him a bed in the trunk of a tree, but Silvius again slept badly, saying that he was being stung by bees and mosquitoes all night. On the third night, the bed was made out of fire. The next morning, Silvius awoke fully refreshed and said that he had slept very soundly.
This myth is said to have established cremation as a funerary practice among the Lithuanians. Also, remind me to look up whether Lithuanian boars have 9 spleens. So what is the general shape of Baltic paganism? It rises from the murky mists of ancient prehistoric Indo-European paganism.
Lithuanians speak a language which belongs to the Indo-European family. You can trace back Lithuanian pagan tradition back to the Indo-European migration, or as it was called previously, Indo-Aryan. Of course, this word Aryan is now not used because of bad connotations. So what does it mean that Lithuanian pagan tradition belongs to the Indo-European tradition? It means that both Lithuanian religion and Lithuanian language has similarities with religions across the Europe, but also in the contemporary Iran and India. One of aspects of this common heritage is three main gods in the religion. There was a French scholar, Georges de Mézil, which created this theory that most Indo-European religions have three main gods, which have three main functions. One is the function of sovereignty, another is function of military, and third is economic function or productivity function. And if you compare it to Hinduism, if you compare it to Norse religion, you will see a lot of similarities. So in Lithuanian paganism, there are three main gods. One is Dievas. Dievas is the creator god, god of heaven. He is connected to the function of sovereignty. He is kind of pushed away. He is not that important, but he is still the highest god and the most important god. This word, Dievas, later became the general word for any god. And in Christianity, we use Dievas to refer to the true God.
As Father Ginter has said, Dievas in the pagan context is kind of pushed away. This is a normal dynamic in pagan religion. There is a father god, the Most High God, who is in the background, and a second figure, a son or servant, is the god to whom humans relate most often, and to whom worship is given. In Canaanite religion, for instance, El is the Most High God, while Baal is his son. In Norse religion, Odin is the father, while Thor is the son engaged with by Norse pagans. Often the secondary god is associated with thunder. Christianity has a similar dynamic, with the Son of God, in a sense, more accessible to humanity than the Father. That said, the relationship of the persons of the Holy Trinity is quite different from what is between pagan gods. And the Son of God, Jesus Christ, is one with his Father, fully God and likewise the Creator. So we can see that pagan religion is a distortion and reduction of this Christian reality known from even the Old Testament. So who is this second figure in Lithuanian paganism?
This Dievas has a servant. He's called the servant of God, or servant of Dievas. This servant is Perkūnas. Perkūnas is connected both to sovereignty and to military function. Perkūnas is a god of thunder. He is connected to the earth. He is between the heaven and the things which are below the earth. He is in between, although there are some myths which tell about how Dievas took him to heaven, but he is in between. He is a mediator. He is in some opposition to Dievas, but as I said, he is characterized as servant of Dievas, so definitely not an enemy of Dievas. He has a chariot ran with goats. When there is a lightning, that's a work of Perkūnas, that's Perkūnija. And even my grandmother would tell me when she hears thunder, she would say that it's Perkūnija outside.
And of course, every religion has a devil, or devils.
And Perkūnas has an enemy, and this enemy is called Velnas or Velnas. Velnas is the god of the underworld, god properly associated with the earth and everything which is below the earth. And this word, Velnas, became a standard word for the devil. Today, when Christians say the devil in Lithuanian, we say Velnas. Also, you can call demons Velniai. That's the same word, but in plural. This Velness is an enemy both of God and of Perkunas, especially of Perkunas. They fight. Velness is also, of course, a god, but he has this antagonism with other gods. And one of the motives is in the mythology is that Velness is envious of Dievas. So, for example, when Dievas creates the world and creates different animals, Velness tries to imitate him and creates different bad animals, like frogs, mosquitoes, etc., parasitic animals and associated with something unclean. Velness or Velness is also, as a god of Underworld, he is lord of souls. That's what his name means. Velness comes from the word vele. Vele is soul of a deceased person. For example, we have Veliness. Veliness is a commemoration of death. So this also comes from Vele, which means a soul of a deceased person. So Veliness is someone who has control over all the souls of deceased persons. He is the king of this realm of the underworld.
There are many other stories we could tell, such as how the married couple of the sun goddess Sole and the moon god Menwo had a falling out when Menwo had an affair with the morning star Oshrine, who awkwardly might be their daughter. For this reason, the moon is cut up into pieces every month by Sole and put back together, which is why the moon has phases. Oh, one more god I wanted to tell you about. Ragutis. He is the god of beer and brewing and mead, because you have to have one of those. And naturally, there are Lithuanian pagan beer rituals. Here's my friend Thomas, a Lithuanian living in Norway who knows a lot about the history of beer in the Baltics.
In a land where barley grows abundant, beer has always been the integral part of culture and community, and the glue itself that held this community together. One of rituals that the Lithuanian pagans performed with their beer was letting the tallest girl in the village stand on a bench and try to chug a whole jug of beer. If she did that without falling down from the bench, the linen would stand tall and the harvest would be good. If she didn't, the opposite would happen. Another ritual is tied to the weddings. In the wedding, the couple, the husband and the bride, would take a cup each, and they would drink from the cup until there were some dregs left. Then they would throw the dregs into each other's eyes, so that abundance and prosperity would follow the married life as far as the eyes could see.
We don't recommend you try this at home. One thing that's especially important to understand about Lithuanian paganism, but also paganism in general, is that the gods are not like the God of Israel. They often behave badly, and they don't fundamentally care about human beings. And in Lithuanian pagan tradition, that apathy is built right into the creation story itself.
Interestingly enough, in Lithuanian pagan tradition, creation of humans is actually an accident, because Dievas simply spits, and from his saliva humans emerge. And at first Dievas didn't notice that he created humans, but later on he notices, and humans basically simply start living in this world without any purpose.
Why do pagans worship their gods then? It is because they experience their presence, often in a dominating, dangerous way, and so they offer worship as a way to get on good terms with their gods, and even to try to get something from them. Worship is the central act of any religion. But why are there no ancient Lithuanian pagan temples?
Ancient Lithuanian pagans, they didn't build temples. They would worship their gods either on hills or in the forests. Trees, especially oaks, were associated with the places of dwellings of gods. There was a belief that some oaks are houses inhabited by gods. That's why we had sacred forests. Only when Lithuanian pagans came into contact with the Christian nations, they started copying them and building their own temples.
So now we begin to get a sense for Lithuanian paganism, a collection of tribes near the Baltic Sea, encountering their gods in forests and mountains, gathering at sacred oaks and sacred groves to offer sacrifice to the fiery thunder god Perkūnas, asking for his thunderous rains, his protection, and his help in battle. Unlike how many see religion today being a part of life, for ancient people, religion was integrated into all of life, not seen as a separate activity. Thus, paganism also affected the organization of ancient Lithuanian society, determining its very structure.
What's also important is that we talked about three main gods in the European religion. So the Indo-European society itself also had three parts. The word tribal comes from Latin tres, three. Usually in the European societies you had three classes: a priestly class, a class of kings and warriors, and also a class of farmers and merchants. Usually the three main gods have these connections to a specific class. And of course, the priestly functions divided according to the class. So there was a special class of priests, although Lithuanian dukes also had some priestly functions and were important in worship. But what happens in the 14th century when Lithuania becomes officially Roman Catholic, those two classes, priests and warriors, basically they cease to exist.
As I said before, we don't have a lot of sources on Lithuanian paganism. But some bits of its stories do survive in folktales, which, again, are an unreliable source, but in many cases, the only source for what Lithuanian pagans believed and practiced. And a lot of what is now presented as authentic Lithuanian paganism is actually of relatively late origin.
The pagan tradition, which survived to the 19th century, is very syncretic. And you can see a lot of interesting stuff when reading those kinds of legends. So, for example, in ancient Lithuanian mythology, there is a cultural hero called Televelis who made a sun and put it in heaven. I've read variation on this legend from the 19th century where Apostle Peter made the sun and put it in heaven. And for example, in the ancient Lithuanian pantheon, you have, I talked only about three gods. There are, of course, more. And with the time, after Christianity became the official religion of Grand Duchy of Lithuania, with the time, the number of gods increased because peasants tend to deify different natural forces, different plants. So this number increases. But even in the oldest version, you also have different gods. And one of the important gods is Lome or Laime, which is a kind of god of fate, destiny. And one of Lithuanian scholars, Gintaras Beresnevičius, he proposed to get rid of tripartite classification of the Mezil and for Lithuanian religion use a four-part system in which three main gods would be accompanied by Lome, which he considered considered also a very important goddess in the ancient Lithuanian mythology. So when you go down the centuries and look at what happened with Lome, for example, you get some kind of legends where Virgin Mary is acting as Lome. And for example, there is a myth where Virgin Mary is asking Dievas, God, who created Perkūnas, how he came to be. And Dievas answers to Virgin Mary that only he knows how Perkūnas came to be, and he won't disclose it to any human being. That's kind of syncretism which survived to the 19th century in popular religion.
So when modern Lithuanians look back on their pagan past, how do they view it? Most of them are Christians, so do they just reject it?
And in the 19th century, many Romantic writers were interested in European paganism, and this was a movement across Europe. So in Lithuania too, many Romantic writers, poets, scholars, they glorified the pagan heritage and created different literary works based on the pagan heritage. And also one of the things which happened was that because of scarcity of written sources to reconstruct the Lithuanian religion, and because only this kind of popular religiosity remained, they used comparative religion studies to add things into their picture. For example, we would compare Lithuanian pagan mythology with ancient Greek, ancient Roman, Norse mythology, and in order to have a full picture, they would supplement with things from those different traditions. In the 20th century, although Lithuania was mainly Roman Catholic, and Roman Catholic identity was very important, especially during Soviet times, these pagan myths and in general pagan heritage was kind of part of historical narrative and an inspiration to preserve Lithuanian culture. Especially in the 1980s, 1990s, a lot of prominent Lithuanian writers and activists, they would get inspiration from the pagan past. And that's also one of the reasons why we have a lot of symbols pointing to this pagan past. So there is no antagonism in Lithuanian identity between the Roman Catholic and pagan heritage. Of course, for Roman Catholics, Roman Catholicism is something better, which replaced paganism. And also it is in the national narrative, it's connected to the European choice of Lithuania. But the pagan past is not dismissed, but it's incorporated as a part of our history. Most of Lithuanians identify as Christians, although it's hard to tell how deep is their faith and what do we understand when we say that they are Christians. How do we understand this word Christian? Because for many, of course, to be Christian is just to go to the church on major feasts and to be baptized and to get married in the church. And that's it. In many European countries, fervent Christians, zealous Christians who would go to the church on every Sunday, who would understand and deepen their faith, they are unfortunately a minority. But on the level of identity, being a Christian, and for most Lithuanians being a Roman Catholic, is a very important part of their identity. And for example, when I converted to an Orthodox faith, although I was actually baptized as a Uniate, as a Greek Catholic or Byzantine Rite Catholic, but for many Roman Catholics, which I knew, it was kind of a shock. Because for them, their identity is very important, and the Orthodoxy is often perceived as something Russian. So it's unthinkable that someone would switch their identity, their faith. But most importantly, as I said, I think it's connected to national identity. I think that zealous Roman Catholics are less bothered by this than those people who just identified as Roman Catholics but don't really practice their religion. For them, it's just an important identifier. In this context, pagan past is not perceived as a real religion. Paganism is not something connected to a living religion in the minds of Lithuanians. That's something in the past, that's something which is not practiced anymore, but it is an important part of the culture because it's part of the past. Because especially the history of Grand Duchy of Lithuania is very important to the Lithuanian identity. Pagan symbols, pagan gods is something which reminds about this past, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. The importance of Baltic paganism for the Lithuanian culture lies in the importance of history for Lithuanians.
You should now have a very rough idea of who the ancient pagan Lithuanians were and how they are seen in modern Lithuania. This context is what forms the background for the first stories we are going to tell.
Žvingia, žvingia širva, žirgas unstainės, verkia, verkia mūs bralelis ant vainas. Aš nusiųsiu margą paukštėn tėvų, kad vaduotų mani jaunų išvainas, kad parduotų parų jaučių dėl mani.
While Lithuania was mentioned briefly in various records, as far back as Herodotus, it does not really emerge onto the pages of history until the 13th century, well into the European medieval period. Most of Europe was Christian by this point, but Lithuania remained pagan, worshipping Perkūnas and other gods from their tribal past. Lithuania soon came to be ruled by its first and only king. That man was named Mindaugas. He was born in the year 1203. It is not known who his father was, but there is a mythic figure named Ringodas, who is identified in the 16th century Palaemonid legends as Mindaugas' father. If these legends are to be believed, it would make Mindaugas a descendant of ancient Romans who immigrated to Lithuania. The first verifiable historical mention of Mindaugas is in a treaty drawn up in 1219 with the kingdom of Galicia-Volhynia, later known as the kingdom of Ruthenia. He would have been 16 years old at the time, and along with his brother Dosbrungas, he is mentioned as one of 5 elder dukes in the region who signed the treaty. At 16 years old, Mindaugas was not old, of course. The title elder duke meant that he occupied a high political status. Mindaugas' realm was between the Neman and Neris rivers, roughly what is now the southeast region of modern Lithuania. The rest of Lithuania was ruled by other regional dukes and princelings in those years. Bound loosely together by cultural, linguistic, and commercial networks, Lithuania was not yet a state, but it was about to be. With the formation of the Livonian Confederation to the north in the territory of modern Latvia and Estonia, ruled by an autonomous branch of the Catholic military monastic order, the Teutonic Knights, pressure mounted on Lithuania to accept Roman Catholicism or face invasion. The city of Riga in Latvia had been founded by Christians and was a base of operations for attempts by Western missionaries and merchants to control the area through the military power of the Sword Brothers of the Livonian Order. They had already forced conversion through the sword upon the Curonians, one of the westernmost Lithuanian tribes living along the coasts of modern Latvia and Lithuania, as recorded in the Livonian Chronicles.
The army then returned to Riga. Those in the fortress at Goldingen struggled against great difficulties and had to learn to be of good cheer amid such discomforts for the sake of God in heaven. Not long afterward, they attacked Ambolten, dismaying the Curonians and forcing them to pay the tithe. Many Curonians were killed before the land was conquered, but to break a stubborn stone, one has to strike hard. One had to show them both kindness and sternness before they would make the decision to accept baptism, but at last they grudgingly accepted it. This annoyed Mindaugas, king of the Lithuanians.
This army was the Knights of the Northern Crusades, who fought pagan Balts, Finns, and Slavs, and sometimes Orthodox Christians, to force their conversion to Roman Catholicism. These crusades had begun invading Lithuania in 1208, when Mindaugas was just 5 years old. Because literacy was not yet established in Lithuania in the 13th century, most of what we know about Mindaugas comes from the chronicles of these enemies of his, and this antagonism is reflected in the text. With Catholic pressure mounting from the north, Lithuanian dukes also battled Orthodox nobles to the east and south, and the threat of the Mongol horde farther south was also being felt. Would Lithuania become Catholic or Orthodox? Would it be by peaceful conversion or military might? Could Lithuania somehow remain pagan? These questions were asked again and again over the next century and a half, and it was while surrounded by militaristic Christian states on all sides that the Lithuanian tribes finally unified. Mindaugas came to power in 1236 as the leader of all the Lithuanian tribes, or so said one of the Livonian chronicles, which, as we heard earlier, called him their king, though he was not a king, in either title or power. The reality was rather more complicated, with multiple dukes controlling different regions of Lithuania, as well as constant threat of invasion. The Livonians certainly took note of the Lithuanians in 1236, however, as they were soundly defeated by an alliance of Lithuanian dukes at the Battle of Saulė, when the Grand Master of the Livonian Order was killed. The Livonian rhymed chronicle records their defeat.
More heathens arrived. The next day the Christians thought to ride away early, but they had to fight the pagans, though they did not want to. In the swamp, they could offer but weak resistance, and they were cut down like women. I lament the deaths of so many heroes who were so easily slain. The master and his brothers put up a heroic defense until their horses were slain, and even then fought on foot and felled many men before they were vanquished. Finally, and with great difficulty, the Lithuanians felled them with long spears. God rest their souls. They, along with many other crusaders, departed this life in glory.
Many such incursions were turned away, pushing Christian crusaders back to the north. One of the many places we went on our pilgrimage was the city of Utmerge, north of Vilnius, and we climbed a great mound that had been a hill fort where the Lithuanians fought back the crusaders. We could almost imagine the sight of those knights advancing, and the local Baltic dukes rallying their men in an attempt to keep their lands and their ways intact. Both sides would have called upon their God for help, the Livonian sword brothers calling on Christ, and the Lithuanians asking for aid from Perkūnas. But of course, we can't romanticize the warriors on either side, many of whom were buried in that hill. They were bloody men fighting in a bloody time, and Mindaugas was no exception. While the Lithuanian dukes were fighting off Christian invasions from the north, throughout the 1230s and 1240s, Mindaugas also eliminated or subjugated most other local leaders. He expanded his holdings into Slavic regions to the southeast, in what is now Belarus, and he set his son Vaishvilkas to rule those lands. Lithuania wasn't quite unified, though. During the years 1248 to 1251, the land was essentially in a constant state of civil war, and it was Mindaugas who emerged finally as the victor. One especially notable victory came when he fended off a coalition between some of the northern Lithuanian dukes led by Tautvilas, his nephew who had allied himself with the Livonians by being baptized Catholic in 1250, the first of the medieval dukes to become Christian. Mindaugas decided to stave off further attacks from the Livonians by being baptized Catholic himself in 1251, as well as agreeing to cede his claim to Samogitian lands in western Lithuania to the order. The Livonian Chronicle records the visit of the Master of the Livonian Order to the court of Mindaugas in 1250.
When the master had heard the messenger who had come to him, he took counsel with his brothers and then rode over many wide heaths until he came to the land of King Mindaugas. He was received by him as befitting a lord. The queen also went to him and lovingly welcomed him and all the brothers who had come there with him. Afterward, when it was time to eat, nothing proper to such an occasion was omitted. They treated their guests well. After they had eaten the meal and had been sitting around the table a short time, the king thanked the master of Livonia for coming there to him. When the master heard the king's words, he spoke kindly, saying to Mindaugas, king of the Lithuanians, "If you become a Christian, I will give you great honor. I will win a crown for you unless I die." The king was pleased by this. He promised the master part of his land and bore goodwill toward him. Then the master and the king swore oaths on it, and this pleased the Christians.
Mindaugas had agreed to become a Catholic. But his deal with the Livonians was not only for peace, it was for a crown. Even though he had been called king by the Livonians, he was not yet truly king. But why would he need agreement from the Livonians to be crowned king? Could he not simply claim the title? In the end, the title was itself a prize dependent upon religious politics. In the 13th century, for any European monarch to be recognized with the title of king, he had to receive it from the Pope of Rome. And since Mindaugas was now a Catholic, that meant he wanted recognition from the Pope. The Livonian Chronicle recounts a second visit to Mindaugas by the Master of the Livonian Order.
The master then had 2 crowns rich in ornament and artistry made for King Mindaugas and his wife, Morta. He had already sent messengers to Bishop Henry of Prussia, who was pleased at the news. He happily rode to the master in Riga, and without delay they all set out on the journey to Lithuania. Priests and brothers joined the master's party. When they arrived in that land, they baptized and consecrated the noble king Mindaugas and his wife Morta. The king rejoiced and gave the master documents, generously conferring upon him rich and fertile lands in his kingdom. When all this was done, the master left priests and brothers in Lithuania and ordered them to teach the people so that they would eventually be blessed. The bishop and the master and all their subordinates then returned to their own lands, and thus the journey ended.
Although he was now a fellow Catholic, in 1252 Tautvilas attacked Mindaugas' capital of Voruta. Voruta was the legendary first capital of Lithuania, whose location and even very existence is not agreed upon by historians. Tautvilas was defeated and eventually fled to Galicia. With one of Mindaugas' rivals out of the way and the Livonians placated for the moment, the Sword Brothers now supported Mindaugas' claim to be king of Lithuania. And Pope Innocent IV of Rome agreed and issued 2 papal bulls in response. The first instructed the Bishop of Chełmno in Poland to crown Mindaugas as king, to appoint a bishop for Lithuania, and to build a cathedral. The second made the new Lithuanian diocese directly subordinate to Rome, rather than to the archbishop in Riga. In the summer of 1253, Mindaugas and Morta were crowned the first king and queen of Lithuania. And although the exact date is not known, July 6th is celebrated as Statehood Day in Lithuania, even to the present day. The Pope gained a Christian Lithuania, a hoped-for bulwark against Mongol invasions that had already made inroads into the Slavic Ruthenian lands to the southeast. The Livonians gained something of a victory by now having a Catholic on the throne of Lithuania, and Mindaugas gained his crown. Mindaugas had expanded the territory of Lithuania to include most of the present-day country as well as lands directly to the south and east, which are now part of modern Belarus. Some near-contemporary sources say that Mindaugas did not remain Christian, but reverted back to the worship of Perkunas and the other gods. Pope John XXII in 1324, some 62 years after the death of Mindaugas, said that he had returned to his pagan errors. And the Galician Volhynian Chronicle says that even after baptism, Mindaugas sacrificed to the Lithuanian gods, conducted pagan rituals in public, and burned corpses. That is, he practiced cremation. These were not the actions of a Christian ruler. Yet Pope Clement IV in 1268, lamenting the manner in which the Lithuanian king died, wrote of him as Mindaugas of happy memory, suggesting that he had died a Catholic. Whether these non-Lithuanian claims are true or not, while officially a Catholic kingdom, Lithuania did not become Christian under Mindaugas as the Pope and Livonians hoped. Most of the nobles remained pagans, and the citizens were not expected to convert.
Tamsoj naktelė, tamsoj naktelė, vilkelis nauja, vilkelis nauja, staukit, nestaukit, staukit, nestaukit, nes jūs nebijom.
In the 1250s, Mindaugas saw how the Livonian order suffered defeats from rebellions of Prussians to the southwest. And so, with the encouragement of his nephew Treniota, he broke peace with the order and retook Samogitia on the Baltic coast. The political advantages he had gained from becoming Catholic had dissolved with the Livonian losses. The Livonian Chronicle records a supposed conversation between Mindaugas and his wife Morta after his decision to ally with Treniota.
Now listen, my dear Lord, what I, your poor Morta, say to you. I must truly grieve that you have acted on Treniota's advice, for you may regret it. I tell you, if you had followed me, you would be happier now. The Master honored you and your people and also myself in all manner of ways. He had ornaments befitting a king made for you, and he instructed his priests to teach you true justice. Now you follow that ape, Treniota, who has betrayed you. Change your mind and follow me for your own good. When the king saw how steadfast his wife was, he said, Lady, I have done what I have done. Leave off the speeches. They can help neither you nor me. I have abused Christianity, whether you like it or not, and I have broken with the Master and chosen paganism. It is too late now for me to listen to your advice, so, lady, hold your tongue. Let things take their course. I will follow the advice of Treniota and the Samogitians. Of that you may rest assured. I know that I have acted foolishly, but I will change all that. Enough of your preaching. Many good things had happened to Mindaugas, as I mentioned earlier, but he had forgotten them completely. He ignored the honor and distinction which the Master had bestowed upon him when he awarded him the crown. He dishonored himself when he followed Treniota's advice and attacked Master Werner and his army.
As the Livonian order lost its control in the region, a coalition formed between Mindaugas' nephew Tautvilas, Tautvilas' son Constantine, and Saint Alexander Nevsky, to attempt to oppose the Lithuanian king. Naught came of the plans, however, while Treniota led his troops to victories along the Baltic coast against the Livonian Order all the way up to Estonia. While Treniota expanded in the west, pursuing an agenda of encouraging Baltic pagans to rise up against Christian rulers, Mindaugas focused on the Ruthenian lands to the southeast. In 1262, Mindaugas' wife Morta died, and he decided to marry her sister, whose name is not remembered to history. There was, however, a problem with this marriage. She was already married to another Lithuanian noble named Domantas. In retaliation, Domantas allied himself with Treniota, and in the autumn of 1263 the two came upon Mindaugas in the Latvian city of Aglona, and they assassinated the king and two of his sons. The Livonian Chronicle records,
Mindaugas, who had been crowned by Master Andreas, as I mentioned, was still living at this time. He soon perished, however, for there was another Lithuanian who bore him great hatred and who was powerful and had many noble friends. He murdered Mindaugas, king of Lithuania, and plotted to secure the kingdom for himself. When Mindaugas was murdered, the best subjects immediately decided to send a messenger to Ruthenia to make the news known to Mindaugas' son. When he heard the report, he came hurrying to Lithuania and took action against those who opposed his father.
Treniota claimed the rulership of Lithuania, though he did not have that crown from the Pope. He was known as the Grand Duke, but he held that title for only a year before being deposed himself by Mindaugas' son Vaishvilkas, who returned to Lithuania.
He sent to the master and asked him to bring help, reminding him that he, too, was a Christian. As soon as the master of Livonia received the message, his heart rejoiced, and he immediately sent for all the commanders and advocates. He bade them come to him with their troops on a given day. They proclaimed the expedition throughout their lands. Meanwhile, Mindaugas' son had freed all the Christians. The only payment he took for this was the grace of God alone. He freed them all from their bonds, and they set out for their former homes. It was noble and virtuous of Mindaugas' son that in his youth he showed such great charity toward the Christians.
No one would ever again be king of Lithuania. But Lithuania was no longer a region of tribal dukes and little fiefdoms. It was becoming truly a nation of its own. Along with the emergence of the Lithuanian state, two stories emerge that are particularly of interest to Orthodox Christians. One is of Domantas, who helped Treniota to assassinate Mindaugas in retaliation for stealing his wife. After a military defeat by Vaishvilkas, Domantas left Lithuania soon after and traveled north to the city of Pskov in northwest Russia. There he became its leader and was baptized as an Orthodox Christian, even later being canonized as a saint. We will tell more of his story in a future episode. As for Vaishvilkas, he became the third monarch of Lithuania, ruling as Grand Duke for 3 years. He did not share Mindaugas' Catholic religion, however, nor did he remain a pagan as Treniota had been. Back in 1254, he signed a treaty on behalf of Mindaugas with Daniel, the Prince of Galicia-Volhynia, transferring the lands referred to as Black Ruthenia to Lithuania, territory which is now part of modern Belarus. As part of the treaty, Daniel's son Shvarn was married to Vaishvilkas' sister. Vaishvilkas himself was baptized, but not Catholic. He was baptized as an Orthodox Christian, taking the baptismal name Laurusas.
Esi tu viešpatie mūsų tėvų Dieve, šlovintinas ir gyriau svertas tavo vardas per amžius. Amen. Tebūna su mumis viešpatie tavo gailestingumas, nes mes tavimi vylėmės.
As I mentioned earlier, Mindaugas appointed Vaishvilkas duke of some of the lands he had gained in the treaty. But the young duke became drawn to Orthodox monastic life and founded Larushavas Monastery on the banks of the Neman River near Novogrudok in his new domain, and handed his rule over to Roman, another son of Prince Daniel. He soon set off on a pilgrimage to the holy mountain of Athos, but had to return before he got there, due to wars he encountered in the Balkans. He later escaped the assassination plot that killed his father in 1264 and became Grand Duke himself with the death of Triniota in 1265. That same year, he and his brother-in-law Schwarn defeated an army of Poles to the west, and in 1267 he again retired to monasticism, turning over Lithuania to Schwarn. Not long after, however, he would also be assassinated in April of that same year, killed by Leo, Schwarn's brother, in retaliation for not receiving a share of the lands himself. Vaishvilkas was buried near the Dormition Church in Volodymyr in northwestern Ukraine. And so passed the last son of Mindaugas, and the first and only Orthodox Christian Grand Duke of Lithuania. Other Lithuanian nobles became Orthodox Christians in this period, especially those who ruled the Ruthenian lands, where most of the citizens were Orthodox themselves. But there were also Orthodox Christians in Lithuania proper, such as in another early capital, Kernava, where pagans and Orthodox mixed together among the lower classes. The presence of Christians is known from archaeological work done on the nearby Krivekishkis burial ground, where traditional Christian burials were found, in contrast with the cremation common amongst pagans. Soon, however, the great capital of Lithuania, itself founded to be a multicultural city, would rise from the earth.
The Legend of the Iron Wolf. The dawn of the 14th century was a time of great change and upheaval. Far to the east, a man whom Europeans called Tamerlane began a bloody rise to power as he sought to restore the glory of the Mongol Empire. In Western Europe, the French and English thrones became locked in a long and bloody series of struggles known simply as the 100 Years' War. And on the northeastern edge of Europe, in a land of beautiful pine forests, on the shores of the Baltic Sea, Grand Duke Gediminas stepped out of legend and into history. This story begins with a hunt, not for a boar or stag, but for the wizened, the powerful and dangerous European bison. For hours, Gediminas tracked his quarry through the valley of Šventaragis, at the confluence between two rivers named the Neris and the Vilnia. The hunt took him through a sacred forest, believed by some to be the burial ground of the ancient dukes of Lithuania, going back to Šventaragis himself, a late member of the legendary Palaemonid dynasty. As later legends tell, the Palaemonids had left Rome during the time of the Emperor Nero, founding the civilization that would become the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. The hunt had taken Gediminas many miles away from his capital of Trakai, through this sacred wood, until finally the great beast was cornered and slain at the top of a great hill. By the time the hunt was over, it was too late to return home. So Gediminas lay down in the ancient forest, surrounded by the graves of his ancestors, and slept at the base of the great hill. And as he slept, he dreamed. In his dream, Gediminas saw a great wolf, covered in plates of iron armor, standing at the top of the hill. The wolf opened its jaws, raised its massive head towards the moon, and howled. The howls of the enormous beast were louder than the howls of 100 wolves, shaking the countryside for miles around. Gediminas awoke in a sweat. He sent for his childhood friend Lizdeka. As a pagan priest, Lizdeka would know about such matters. Lizdeka's origins are even more shrouded in mist than Gediminas' own. According to legend, Gediminas' father had found the infant Lizdeka in an eagle's nest and raised him as his own son. "I have dreamed a strange dream," the Grand Duke said to his friend, and told the priest what he had seen. "Do not fear," said the priest, when Gediminas told him of his dream. "This iron wolf is a strong and fortified city which you will build at the top of this hill. The sound of his howl is the fame of the city, which will be spread abroad throughout the whole earth, and distant lands will quake in fear when they hear its name." The Grand Duke Gediminas believed the dream and its interpretation, and lost no time in bringing it to fulfillment. He built a fortification on top of the hill which now bears his name, and soon a settlement and then a town sprang up around the tower, which was ideally situated to command the passage of 2 rivers. From one of these rivers, the Vilnia, the city took its name, Vilnius. As generations passed, the dream of the Iron Wolf seemed to come true. Vilnius grew in fame and glory and became the capital of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the center of what would become, for a time, the largest state in Europe. But this is only the beginning.
On our 4th day in Lithuania, we climbed up to the windy top of Gediminas Hill to have a look at Vilnius and to stand in the place of a legend.
This city of Vilnius was established in the 14th century by Grand Duke of Lithuania, Gediminas. Before that, this place was only hills and forests, and you can see, and some rivers. And you can see around us there are a lot of hills. That's because during the Ice Age, huge, massive ice laid here. There are some places which are called in Lithuanian Ozas. This means that it was like a place where the ice was, and after the ice melted, it left those hills. And that's what Gediminas did. He built this city near river Vilnelė, and that's why the city is called Vilnius. Vilnė is like a wave. We can say that Vilnia upės bangos, something like that. That means that waves are going. So yeah, and that's where the name of the city comes from. And Gediminas saw this city as a new capital, and he, in a dream, he had this prophecy that this will be a great city, but everyone around the world will know it. That's why he invited many people from all over Europe to start business here, to create art, to trade. And that's why from the very beginning Vilnius was intended as a multicultural city.
Looking out at Vilnius from those windy heights, we tried to imagine ourselves standing next to Gediminas after he woke from his dream. There on Gediminas Hill stand the remnants of an old castle, now just one red brick tower which houses a museum. Topped with a Lithuanian flag, the tower is a symbol of Lithuanian national identity. The red roofs of the Vilnius Old Town stretch out and surround the hill, littered with churches, mostly Catholic, some Orthodox. you can see Dormition Orthodox Cathedral and the Orthodox Monastery of the Holy Spirit. Nearby is a monument of 3 white crosses commemorating martyred Franciscan friars. Vilnius has stood for nearly 700 years, and over time it has been home to many cultures and religious groups. The dream of Gediminas for a diversity of peoples, all making their home in the city, has largely held true. Gediminas was born in 1275, not even a decade after all the assassinations and unrest of the earliest years of the formation of the Lithuanian state around Mindaugas. He came to power in 1316, and it is not really known who his father was. His predecessor was Grand Duke Vytenis, who ruled from 1295 to 1316. Because of the lack of written sources from the period, there are various theories as to the relationship between Gediminas and Vytenis. Some say he was his son, some say his cousin, some say his brother. And the Livonian chronicles, notable for their negative take on almost everything Lithuanian, say he was his hostler, a servant who works in the stables, who murdered Vytenis and usurped his throne. Whatever the case, between Vytenis and Gediminas, the borders of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania greatly expanded into what is modern Belarus, encompassing the cities of Polotsk, Vitebsk, Minsk, Brest, and the land surrounding them. And while the political history of Gediminas is central to the early history of Lithuania, perhaps his most enduring and pervasive legacy is the legend of the Iron Wolf itself. It is the founding legend of Vilnius, and an icon of Lithuanian identity.
The story about the Iron Wolf is, first of all, the story about how our capital, Vilnius, was established. So it is especially important for those who live in Vilnius, and it's interesting for them. Of course, it is also read in every school in Lithuania, because it's a story about Grand Duke Gediminas. So it's also part of our history of Grand Duchy of Lithuania. So that's why in every school kids get familiar with this story. And today Iron Wolf is a symbol not only of Vilnius, but also of one of the most important parts of Lithuanian army. That's a motorized infantry brigade of Iron Wolf, which, by the way, this year celebrates 30 years from its creation. So if by any chance anyone from this brigade listens to what I am telling, so I would like to thank them for their service, but I think that that's unlikely that they will listen. But that's one of the brigades which is part of the NATO defense system. So Iron Wolf is also one of the symbols of the Lithuanian army.
One might say, well, this is a pagan story about pagans. And that is true. Gediminas lived and died a pagan. And even the interpretation of the dream was supplied by a pagan priest. But true paganism is long gone in Lithuanian history. As we heard Father Ginteris say earlier, it is not a practiced religion anymore. And so that means that this legend cannot carry within it the demonic force of pagan worship. Instead, what is left is transmitted without the pagan content. The Iron Wolf has become a symbol of Lithuanian history and identity. As the Lithuanians' neighbors across the Baltic Sea, the Christianized Norse, would include images from their own legends of Sigurd and Fafnir, even on the outer doors of churches. Christian Lithuanians also keep and honor their legends, imbuing them with new meaning and telling the stories with a Christian maturity. What is in the past is in the past, but it can also be brought from the past into the present with a new form and with new possibility. But in the course of our tale, we have not yet emerged from pagan Lithuania. It is not Christian, not yet. And the tale of Grand Duke Gediminas gave rise to another, even more enduring tale, a tale of eternal significance. But first, we will hear the tale of the beginnings of an Orthodox diocese into the Grand Duchy of Lithuania.
Šlovinkit viešpaties vardą, šlovinkit, kurie jam tarnaujat. Alleluja, alleluja, alleluja.
It is not often remembered now, but there was once an Orthodox metropolis of Lithuania that was part of the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. It did not last even 60 years, and its existence was due mainly to the power struggles between the Grand Dukes of Lithuania and Moscow, as well as the incursions of the Mongol horde in the lands of modern Ukraine. As we have heard, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was still expanding in the medieval period, and now included lands populated by Ruthenians, that is, Orthodox Christian Slavs. This expansion was helped by the weakening of the Ruthenian nobility due to the Mongol invasions. Although the Grand Dukes themselves were still mostly pagans in the 14th century, they ruled over many Orthodox Christians, and some Lithuanian nobles had been baptized in the Orthodox Church. The Grand Dukes did not insist that their citizens be pagans, and because the Orthodox Church was so important in their lands, alongside the program of the Grand Dukes for the recognition of a unified Lithuanian state, it was only natural that they would seek to have their own ecclesiastical province, independent of the metropolitans in Kiev, Vladimir, and Moscow. This would bolster not only the Lithuanian state, but also help to deflect influence from the Roman Catholic Church in Lithuania, which by this point did not have much of a presence there. So it was, sometime between 1315 and 1317, as Gediminas was coming to power, that Ecumenical Patriarch John XIII ordained a Ruthenian named Theophilus as the Metropolitan of Lithuania, with his seat in Novogrudok, where Vaishvilkas had built his monastery decades before, with 2 diocesan bishops dependent upon him in Polotsk and Turov. Around the same time, a metropolis of Galicia was created in western Ukraine, but often left vacant with no bishop. In 1325, St. Peter the Metropolitan of Kiev moved his headquarters west from the city of Vladimir to Moscow, owing to the weakening of the region by Mongol invasions. When he died the following year, Gediminas put forward Metropolitan Theophilus of Lithuania as candidate for the Kievan See, hoping to unite the two under his influence. Meanwhile, the Grand Duchy of Moscow also put forward its own candidate, but the Ecumenical Patriarchate rejected both, and in 1328 installed Theognostus, a Greek from Constantinople, as Metropolitan of Kiev. Theognostus made his headquarters initially in Volhynia and later in Moscow. He suffered much from the Muslim Tatars in defense of the Church, and was eventually canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church in the 19th century. Theophilus died in 1329, and his Lithuanian see was left vacant, effectively giving Theognostus control over the Orthodox Church in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. He argued that no bishop should be appointed to replace Theophilus, since the Grand Duchy was still too pagan. St. Theognostus himself died in 1353. Meanwhile, Gediminas had died in 1341, and after some years of civil war, his son Algirdus, another pagan, took his place as Grand Duke of Lithuania. He did not attempt to revive the Lithuanian metropolis at first, but with the death of Theognostus sought to put his own candidate, Theodoret, on the united ecclesiastical throne of Kiev. Constantinople instead chose Saint Alexios, Bishop of Vladimir, as Metropolitan of Kiev in 1354, who had been favored for the position by St. Theognostus before his death. Theodoret then went to the then schismatic Bulgarian church for ordination, but Algirdas soon withdrew his support in favor of a monk from Tver named Roman, who is a relative of his wife's. With the brief rise of St. Philotheos Kokinos to the throne of the Ecumenical Patriarchate in 1353 and 1354, then the return of Patriarch Kallistos in 1355, an agreement was made with all parties to appoint Roman as Metropolitan of Lithuania, uniting the Lithuanian metropolis with the Galician metropolis, and creating a new metropolis of Lithuania-Volhynia, with the see at Novogrodok. Meanwhile, in 1360, Algirdas took Kiev and incorporated it into the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. The Ecumenical Patriarchate did not immediately clear up ambiguity between the authority of the new metropolis and the Kievan metropolis headed by St. Alexios and with its headquarters in Moscow. And so a struggle between the two lasted until Roman's death in 1362. With his death, St. Alexios became the sole metropolitan in the Ruthenian lands controlled by the Grand Duchies of Lithuania and Moscow, administering the vacant Lithuanian metropolis until 1371. At this time, the Lithuanian see was demoted to the status of a bishopric and made dependent on the Kievan metropolis. Despite the new canonical responsibility, the Orthodox of the Grand Duchy of Moscow made no attempt to evangelize their Lithuanian neighbors by sending missionaries. And Kiev itself, which was the city in the metropolitan's title, had been much reduced in population due to the Mongols. So the lands of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania remained a mix of pagans with Orthodox populations to the southeast in its Ruthenian lands, largely neglected by the church responsible for their evangelization. Nevertheless, Algirdas, while insulted by the demotion of the Lithuanian see, did not promote Orthodox mission work among his people, since he did not wish to alienate his still largely pagan nobility. Oddly enough, in December 1375, St. Philotheos consecrated a Bulgarian monk named Cyprian as Metropolitan of Kiev, Russia, and all Lithuania, even while St. Alexios was alive and the Metropolitan of Kiev. St. Alexios died the following February, and Cyprian was left as the sole Orthodox metropolitan in the region. He was canonized in the 15th century. One more attempt was made in 1414 to appoint a Metropolitan of Lithuania by Grand Duke Vytautas, but ultimately this venture went unrecognized in the Orthodox world. What are we to make of all this? Is it all just ecclesiastical and civil politics with their normal tug-of-war for power and position? In an earthly sense, yes, this is true. But did you notice how many saints were involved in all this? Among them is a holy confessor like St. Theognostus, who suffered at the hands of the Tatars. Or St. Philotheos Kokinos, who would go on to be a significant liturgical commentator and reformer, as well as the canonizer of St. Gregory Palamas, and Saints Peter and Alexios and Cyprian. This is often how the Holy Spirit works in the world. While the world sees the real story as being about the politics, this is only the earthly frame within which the true story of Christ's work is being done. These saints became of eternal significance for the Orthodox Church, and all of them, in one way or another, touched the story of Lithuania and helped to shape its history, bringing salvation to souls. And as Orthodox Christians, we also have them as part of our own story. But now, there is one more story I want to share with you from this earliest period of our tale. Rising out of all this complication and confusion are three shining stars, whose lights forever shine from Lithuania and throughout the world.
The three martyrs of Vilnius. The Grand Duke Gediminas had 7 sons. The dream of the Iron Wolf and the prophecy of Lizdeka seemed to have come true during Gediminas's lifetime. Gediminas extended his rule south and east, conquering Kiev and carrying his banners to the borders of the Golden Horde in the east and south almost to the very shores of the Black Sea. His main enemies, 2 kingdoms of Roman Catholic Crusader Knights known as the Teutonic and Livonian orders, posed little threat to the new empire he had forged, and Gediminas remained a staunch pagan until his death. At his death, he divided his realm among his sons, leaving his capital, Vilnius, in the possession of his son Jonutis. This choice puzzled many and angered his other sons, especially the assertive Algirdas. After all, Jonutis was not a natural warrior or an able ruler, nor was he the eldest. But he was the eldest son of Gediminas' second wife, an Orthodox Christian duchess named Yona. And Yona was a force to be reckoned with. The role of the Queen Mother had always exerted great authority among the pagan Lithuanians, and Gediminas seemed to hope that the son of an Orthodox duchess might be more accepted by the citizens of the growing Grand Duchy. Since Gediminas' conquests of the south and east, Orthodox Christians outnumbered pagans in Lithuanian lands at a rate of 2 to 1. And so, Algirdas and the other brothers bided their time, expanding their own territories and successfully making war against the Livonian order. Then, around 1344, Yona died. Algirdas and his brothers descended upon Vilnius. Jonutis was imprisoned, though he did manage to escape to his brother-in-law, Simeon of Moscow, where he spent most of the rest of his life unsuccessfully trying to find someone willing to give him an army in order to retake his throne. Algirdas was Grand Duke now, and he would preside over an empire which stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea, and from Brest to within 50 miles of the city of Moscow. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania was now the largest state in all Europe. Algirdas himself was married to an Orthodox Christian princess by the name of Maria of Vitebsk, and at her request, a church, dedicated to Saint Paraskevi, was built in Vilnius on the site of an old pagan temple once dedicated to Ragutis, the old Lithuanian god of beer and mead. She also brought with her to Lithuania an Orthodox priest named Nestor. The Church of St. Paraskevi was the first Christian church to be built in Vilnius, and, indeed, the first church in all of Lithuania. And as long as Maria lived, Algirdas continued his father and brother's policy of tolerating Orthodox Christianity alongside paganism, so long as the Christians did not proselytize. But 2 years later, Maria died. Algirdas fell under the influence of the pagan priests who had advised his father and, in time, began to attempt to root out Lithuanians who had converted to Orthodox Christianity. Among these new converts were 2 young noblemen by the name of Negilas and Kumeris, who had been baptized at the Church of St. Paraskevi and taken the names Anthony and John. Anthony and John were, we are told, careful not to flaunt their Christianity, but they would neither keep the same feasts as the pagans nor cut their hair in the same manner as the pagans, believing that both of these actions would involve them in the worship of demons. The Grand Duke and his priests became increasingly suspicious of the 2 brothers, until one day a test was proposed. The 2 brothers should be summoned to a great feast during the Orthodox Nativity fast, and there they should be offered the richest servings of the finest meat and wine. The brothers came to the feast, but refused to break their fast, and the Grand Duke had them clapped in irons and imprisoned in his dungeon. They spent the next year fasting in truth, barely kept alive on bread and water. The darkness, hunger, and isolation proved too much for John. He agreed to do whatever the prince asked. Triumphant, Algirdas had the brothers hauled before him, once again offering them a rich meal during a time of fasting. John capitulated and was allowed to go free, but Anthony refused to betray Christ and was returned to the dungeon. But John soon learned that to deny Christ was worse than any torture he might have faced in the Grand Duke's dungeons. He was a pariah, rejected as a turncoat by Christians and pagans alike, and worst of all, he had lost the fellowship and friendship of his brother. Secretly, via the priest Nestor, he asked his brother to forgive him. Anthony's reply was firm: "When you openly confess Christ, then we will be reconciled." Desperate, John, who by now had been reinstated to his old position in the Grand Duke's service, approached Algirdas in the sauna, confiding in him, begging his mercy, and telling him of his secret desire to be reconciled with the Church and with his brother. Algirdas's response was cool and collected. "Do you think I care," he asked, "what a man believes in the privacy of his own heart and home? Worship the gods of our people. Worship your crucified one, I care not. But when you are in public, as a member of my court and a citizen of this city, you must do as we do. You must eat what we eat." And then, there in the middle of the bathhouse, something extraordinary happened. John found his courage. Standing up, and in the middle of Algirdas's courtiers and retainers, John loudly proclaimed, "I am a Christian." He was immediately beaten with canes, and then thrown into the dungeon, with his brother, and a few days later the two of them partook of the Holy Mysteries together in joy. Meanwhile, crowds gathered at the prison to hear the preaching of the two brothers, and many were converted to faith in Jesus Christ. After this, Anthony was executed by hanging on a sacred oak. In that moment, the tree that had been sacred to the old gods truly became sacred to the Christians of Vilnius, imaging the wood of the cross, even as Anthony in his martyrdom became an icon of his Savior. Anthony was martyred on the 14th of April, 1347. The city of Vilnius was electrified by the martyrdom, and by the news of John's renewed resolve. The pagan priests hoped that John would falter once again, seeing the death of his brother and the torments which awaited him. But every day the crowds around the prison grew larger, and every day John's resolve grew stronger. Finally, they strangled him and hanged his dead body on the same oak tree. St. John's martyrdom took place on the 24th of April, 1347. The martyrdom of the two brothers did not have the effect the pagan priests intended. Instead of cowing Vilnius's little Christian community, it strengthened their resolve. Among those inspired by the sufferings of the two brothers was a kinsman of theirs, Krulis by name, who had been given the name Eustathios in holy baptism. Eustathios was well known among Algirdas's court for his good looks, valor, and courage in the hunt and battle. But his physical courage was matched by his strength of character. When once again it was the Nativity fast, Eustathios, like his kinsman, and like Daniel and the three holy children of old, refused to pollute himself by eating the delicacies of the king's table. At this point, Algirdas had had enough. He ordered the young noble to be beaten with iron rods, ice water poured in his mouth, his ankle bones broken, and the hair and skin ripped from his head. Finally, they cut off his nose and ears. Eustathios endured all of these terrible torments with so much joy and courage that even his tormentors were astonished at the power which was given to him by his God. Finally, on the 13th of December, 1347, the martyr Eustathios finished his struggle. He was strangled. His body hung on the same oak tree as his two kinsmen. For 3 days, the Christians were not allowed to come and take his body down. During that time, a pillar of smoke miraculously enveloped the body, preventing wild beasts and carrion fowl from harming it. Later, a church would be built on that very hill dedicated to the Holy Trinity, its altar table built on the stump of the very oak on which the martyrs had died. The relics of the three holy martyrs were soon found to be incorrupt, and their veneration soon spread as far as Constantinople and even to the great Russian ascetic Sergius of Radonej, who requested particles of their relics for his veneration. Their relics have been hidden and moved many times during the wars and conflicts of intervening centuries, but they currently lie incorrupt in the center of the monastery church of the Holy Spirit in Vilnius, a source of blessing and intercession for the city and for all of Lithuania. And as for Algirdas, his persecution of the Christians soon ebbed, and he even married another Orthodox wife. Some even say that Algirdas finished his life in the Orthodox Church, receiving baptism and the monastic tonsure shortly before his death.
For years, I had dreamed of making the pilgrimage to Vilnius, to stand at the reliquary of the three martyrs, to ask their intercessions. And then, there we were. In the great Baroque Orthodox Church of the Monastery of the Holy Spirit. It rises up high, suffused with sunlight, the pale pastel walls glowing with ornate sculpture adorning every curve and height. At the east end is an almost shockingly saturated green-painted iconostasis, framing time-darkened icons whose images hold deep shadows. In the center of the church is a dark red wooden reliquary, large enough to hold the full bodies of all three martyrs, the holy brothers Anthony and John, with their cousin Evstathios. In Lithuanian, Antanas, Jonas, and Eustachios. And the bodies show forth a quiet miracle, still ongoing since 1347. They are incorrupt, preserved by God from fading into dust, their bodies still belonging to the saints, still showing forth the hope of the resurrection. Raised pagan worshippers of the fire and thunder god Perkunas, these men suffered nearly 700 years ago for their love for Jesus Christ. The faith had been brought to them by a princess, but it was not for her that they were baptized. They were baptized into Christ, redeemed and saved by his love for them. They are the proto-martyrs of Lithuania. With their martyrdom, the name of Christ was forever sealed in that country. And not long after, the worship of Perkunas and the other gods finally began the descent into oblivion. Where the Baltic Sun Cross had been a pagan emblem, it too became a legend transformed by the love of Christ. The martyr's blood had marked the land forever for Christ, and we magnify them. Tested in the fire of torture like gold in a crucible, ye were radiantly tried, O ever-memorable martyrs, and have been shown to be more precious than gold in your nature. For showing forth the all-radiant beauty of your souls, ye truly offered yourselves to the Master as most precious vessels, not having worshipped fire. Wherefore pray to the Lord for us all, that he grant remission of sins unto those who honor your memory with love. refusing to worship fire, and being subjected to fire and torments, O ever memorable ones, ye received heavenly dew, divine rest, and everlasting joy. And having utterly consumed the princes of darkness by your endurance of pain, O all-wise martyrs, ye have made the faithful steadfast in true piety. O valiant and honored athletes, who spurned earthly honors and glory, mightily and manfully did ye endure torments for the sake of the faith, giving yourselves over to death for the Master, the life of all. Wherefore, with a pillar of cloud from heaven, did Christ all gloriously illumine you. Standing before him with the angels, pray ye that our souls be saved. Having caused branches of the Orthodox faith to spring forth from a barren root, O all blessed ones, ye were shown to be namesakes of the proto-martyr. For ye were not daunted by the wrath of the evil and impious prince, who commanded you to renounce Christ. Wherefore, having received crowns of victory, and standing with the angels before the throne of the Master, O all blessed ones, pray for us, who in orthodox manner honor your holy memory. From the Service to the Three Martyrs of Vilnius, celebrated April 14th. I was greatly blessed to concelebrate the Divine Liturgy at the Monastery of the Holy Spirit with His Eminence Metropolitan Innocent of Vilnius and Lithuania, to stand next to the martyrs, worshipping alongside them at the altar of Christ. And at the end of the service, Metropolitan Innocent gave into my hands relics of each of the three martyrs. And so it came to be that you can venerate these martyrs' holy relics at the Antiochian Orthodox Church of St. Paul, our parish in Emmaus, Pennsylvania. Holy Martyrs Anthony, Evstathios, and John, pray for Lithuania. Pray for the Church in Lithuania. Pray for us. Pray for my family. Pray for me.
Partiltajo jau nuo žirga puoliau ir su priešais kariavau. Partiltajo jau nuo žirga puoliau ir ir su priešais kariavau.
I went to Lithuania because of my great-grandparents. But I also went because there were stories I wanted to know, stories I believed would enrich my experience of God and bring more clarity to my experience of the world, stories that would touch and form my soul. I went to Lithuania to venerate the martyrs. This was episode 1, and we've got a lot more stories to tell. The Wolf and the Cross, an Orthodox Christian pilgrimage in Lithuania, is a documentary created by Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Richard Rohlin, based on a pilgrimage made in August of 2022. This episode was written, directed, and narrated by Father Andrew Stephen Damick, with additional writing by Richard Rohlin. Thank you to our voice actors, Brandon Talley and Dr. Cyril Jenkins. Our producer and editor is Father David Hyatt. The Lithuanian folk music for this episode was provided by Ugniavias, which is spelled Ugniavijas, and whose music you can find on Spotify and YouTube. The Magnification hymn to the Three Martyrs of Vilnius was sung by the Amnos Choir, directed by Motinella Justina Trinkunaitė Sungalinė. Very special thanks goes to our pilgrimage guide and interpreter, as well as consultant on all things historical, linguistic, and Orthodox in Lithuania, Father Gintaras Sungaila. Thanks also go to the Center for Orthodox Christian Initiatives in Vilnius, whose work you can find at ortodoksas.lt, spelled ortodoksas.lt, and to the Russian Orthodox Diocese of Vilnius and Lithuania, whose website is orthodoxy.lt. If you want to support this kind of Orthodox Christian storytelling, share this podcast with your friends, and go to ancientfaith.com/support and make a donation. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.
Prie mano kojelių, o antra prie šalelės. O ši motinėlė, ši augintojėlė, visą savo